Good afternoon to everybody. Good to meet again after a month. Isaac, you kept saying last week. It's actually last month. It's good to see us all. And we are doing, let me just spotlight my video for everyone. Yes. So we are covering the series Arise and Shine, or Sit and Wait for the Rapture. And it's amazing. We started, was it April this year? And we already gone through the year. We haven't finished, so we still have a while to go. But next month, next first Sunday, we'll make the announcements. But next, we'll indicate exactly what happens in the next month coming up. So let me not spend time on too much time on preliminaries. I'd like us to go straight into the message for this Sunday, first Sunday of the month. So we're doing part 4. We are taking time on Matthew 24 because Matthew 24 has been perhaps one of the most quoted passages when talking about the end of the age. And I think by now you're beginning to understand that the end of the age may have a slightly different meaning from what we've always thought. And I think today we're going to look at an alternative view, which if you follow closely, will help us to understand some more detail. I would just ask that you take your notes. Let's keep close attention so that there'll be a chance to have discussions at the end. And so as we go along, make sure you take your notes. We've always prefaced or preambled this with a theme that began last year. I'll build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. And I just want to keep underscoring this until it's etched in our spirits and our minds. Jesus promised, he personally committed to do what is said here. He is the builder of the church and he personally committed that he would build it. And so he's the center of this whole process. And he says, I will. He determined that when it would come to pass, and we did not know, the poor had at the first time did not realize that there'll be a long time to it. We are now, it's been a drawn out process, it's close to 2,000 years. The church is personal to him. It is my church, not my churches, my church. And the church is the called out ones. The word he used was a very specific word. He did not use a religious word. At the time he lived, there was a synagogue. There were synagogues all over the land of Israel. There was a temple in Jerusalem. He didn't say, I'll build my temple, I'll build my synagogue. He used a word from the marketplace, if you want, or from government. I'll build my ecclesia, the called out ones, my assembly, those who had the power to make decisions in a local area. That's the term he used. It's a very, very specific word. And he also mentioned that the gates of hell, the counsels of hell, the strength of hell would not prevail. We need to have this very clear as we talk about the last days and what we call the last days, because they may not be exactly what we think they are, but we need to be very clear in our minds that this word that our Lord said concerning the church will come to pass. The church will defeat the gates of hell. It is not an end story of the gates of hell pushing back the church and the church is hidden in the gates. No, it is, I'll build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. That means as the church moves, the gates of hell will just be moving back and moving back. We need to have that very clear as a narrative, because the kingdom of darkness has pushed another narrative, which is an escapist narrative. And that's why our theme is arise or shine or sit and wait for the rapture, sit and wait for rescue from heaven. So that is something we start with, and I just felt I should keep that at the front of everything we're doing. Now, on the OLIVET discourse, this is the message Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives. There was a question about, there are 3 questions actually, Matthew 24, there are 3 questions. Those 3 questions which Jesus answers in the following passage were, when will all these things happen? I'm just recapping for the sake of those for our own sakes also, by the way, so that we get up to date. But there are those who may have joined us for the first time. What will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign of your coming? And about the what about the sign of the end of the age? So when we understand those questions in that way, then it changes our understanding of that passage, because traditionally the understanding is, when you see earthquakes, you see false Christ, as we're going to see, you see all these things, and the end is near. And every time something happens in the world, everyone is up with the signs of the end. When there was a tsunami in 2004, oh my goodness, all over the place, signs of the end. Now, last 2 years, there's been this whole COVID thing, which has still not left us, by the way, signs of the end. And so every world event for the last 2,000 years has been marked the end because of misunderstanding, maybe not the last 2,000 years exactly, but there's been a misunderstanding of this passage. So this is what we are going through to understand. And as Bible scholars, I challenge you to write down things, go and search them, question what I'm telling you, ask, interact with the Holy Spirit. And if you're joining us now, make sure you follow through, because we've been building up very slowly so that you understand exactly where we are. And we talked about Jesus telling the Jews in Matthew 23 before 24, I will bring the judgment of all the prophets on this generation. This generation was very specific. This generation, the generation that was about to reject him also. And we talked about the Holocaust of AD 70, as Isaac has already mentioned, where 20,000 Roman soldiers surrounded the city, cut off supplies of food, starved the people, led away 97,000 Jews as captives, but many, many more were killed in that time. So, in fact, the estimates are quite big about the number of people who were killed. And then we looked at the context of Matthew 24. I've already emphasized this generation. That means the generation that was alive. I won't go over that again. We looked at, we've been going through these different signs, it's different signs of the things he indicated. I don't know why this is moving too fast. The things he indicated, many come claiming to be Christ, wars and rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, birth pangs of the new age, persecution, apostasy, preaching. All these things have been unpacked. And we have shown how these things were fulfilled before the destruction of Jerusalem. So that is something to look at. And more specifically, in Matthew 24:28, Jesus says to his disciples that wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Talking about Jerusalem. Now, interestingly, when you look at the symbol of the Roman army and the word for corpse, and those as eagles, vultures, there was really no differentiation at that time between these birds. And you can imagine the picture of these 20,000 Roman soldiers surrounding Jerusalem with that was their emblem, the eagle. You could see how this verse was fulfilled, literally, the banner of the vulture, which they carried on their flags, the vulture actually, but the vultures, and they painted, surrounding and descending upon Jerusalem. The corpse, Jerusalem had become the corpse, and these eagles were coming. Jesus was speaking about these things about 40 years before they happened. And last time we looked at the significance of the destruction of the temple being the holy city. This was like to them very, very sacred place, that the thought of the temple being destroyed, would be like, the days of Jeremiah when Nebuchadnezzar came and took everyone away. Jerusalem was their holy city, the place where the temple stood, the place where Abraham was willing to offer his son, Mount Moriah, the place where God appeared to David. Solomon built the first temple there. The high priest offered sacrifices. There was a daily sacrifice, as Isaac reminded us. It was the center of Jewish life. It was really, you could not separate them from that. And Jesus is now saying it's going to be destroyed. So their heritage was completely destroyed in AD 70. They were cut off from God. They lost their identity. their religious system was abolished. This was a very big turning point in God's plan of work through the ages. And so when the temple was destroyed, it ended a certain religious system which had been going on for millennia. It was coming to an end. They were just a few years away from that end, coming right from the days of Moses, it was now coming to an end. And for those who were listening, it was like, what in the world would cause an end, destroy the temple? This must be so, horrible that still would mark the end of the world. Now, we then looked at Hebrews, where the writer of the Hebrews explained how the Jewish religious system was abolished and replaced with the new covenant. Okay, so he has made the first obsolete, but whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is about to disappear. Now, at the time this was written, the temple was not yet out, but was very close to being out. So that is what we've covered so far in summary, and all these things are available on YouTube. You can update yourself, you can go back and revise some things. Today we have a new covenant with better promises. We have a high priest who has made the ultimate and final sacrifice. We transition from the old covenant to the new, and we'll now begin to address the second question. The first question is, when will all these things be? What things? The destruction of the temple. What will be the sign of your coming? Now, that's what we want to address today to a large extent. What will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign of your coming? Now, typically, all the years I've read this passage, the first thing that comes to mind is when they asked, what will be the sign of your coming? Well, the disciples were asking about the sign of Jesus' second coming. Okay. So basically, the dispensationalist view, which has been the prevalent view around here for quite a while, is looking and thinking, what will, after all these signs of Jerusalem, the verses preceding, there will be a sign, these things now there'll be earthquakes, all these false Christs and so on, and then at the end of it, the son of, there'll be something that will be a sign that Jesus is returning on the earth. So in other words, at some point in the future, after wars, after earthquakes and persecutions and so on, Jesus will return. Now, just remind us, the first question they asked is, when will all these things be? And now we've understood that that question meant, when will Jerusalem and the temple be destroyed? We've gone through that. The second question was, what will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign of your coming into your kingdom? What will be the sign of your coming into your kingdom? Now, I just want to give context here, and I just would like you to really pay attention and follow me. If you have followed the events of Jesus, this was the day, remember, he just moved into the triumphant entry to Jerusalem. It was just a few days before his crucifixion when he said these words. But what was the mood among the disciples? What was the mood? Were they expecting Jesus to die? The answer is no. In fact, I did a detailed study of the road from the Mount of Transfiguration to Capernaum to Jerusalem. It's a very interesting study. The major thing that was going on among the disciples was a power struggle, because they had this sense that Jesus was now about to manifest as the King of the Jews, was about to drive out the Romans, was about to establish his kingdom. And that is why among them, you had the sons of Zebedee sending their aunt, their mom actually was Jesus' aunt, to give them, that special privilege of sitting one at the right hand, one at the left. They were not thinking about Jesus' death or resurrection. This was the farthest things from their mind. Just put yourself in their shoes. Now, there had also been this triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Jesus had come in I think that either that day or the previous day, he had walked into Jerusalem, not walked, he had ridden to Jerusalem. And everyone who saw it must have been thinking of Zephaniah chapter 9, behold, your king comes riding lowly on a colt. Then the next verse, verse 10, I think, of Zephaniah, it says, he will drive out the horses from Ephraim. He will establish the kingdom. So everyone was thinking, wow, the time has come, the Messiah. and they sing Hosanna to the Son of David. That was a title designated for the Messiah. So I just wanted to appreciate that in the minds of these people, they were not thinking about Jesus dying and coming again. No, that was the farthest things from their minds. They did not even know anything about a second coming. There are parables Jesus had spoken, which were really strange. You look at one or two of them. So we need to understand when they asked, what will be the sign of your coming? What was in their minds? Were they thinking about him coming again a second time? What were they referring to? Now, Jesus himself had used similar terminology before, saying that in Matthew 16:28, he had said, truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, you notice here that when he talked about your coming, it's titled Coming and the Kingdom. Okay? So what are they referring to? What are they referring to? We need to be able to, and once we understand that, then we'll understand exactly what Jesus is talking about here. And he was saying within your mentions here that there are some of you who are here who will not die until you see, let me just read again, until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So some of the views, some views think about Jesus coming the last day or whatever time he'll appear. Others, and another view which talks about him coming, and it's very much linked with this whole Jerusalem and the judgment of the temple, and I'll explain that in a moment. So we've seen how the first question was answered about what happened in AD. Okay? What happened in AD 70. So I'm giving a slightly different view, and just follow me and you can judge it and think about it. So what were they asking Jesus? When will you step into your kingdom and reveal yourself as king? What will be the sign of your coming? So let's get on with it. So the Jews at that time were looking for a Messiah. As I said, they're looking for a Messiah. They were looking for a deliverer from the Romans. They had heard. Now that phrase was first used specifically by Daniel. We've already looked at it. I'll just have to remind you. All of them knew that at a certain point, God would appoint a redeemer who would be called the Son of Man. And that's the term Daniel used. We look at in chapter 7. He used the term Son of Man, somebody who would come and would receive a kingdom, and everyone would bow to him. They knew. Daniel had talked about these things. Every adult Jew knew it. Someone who would show up, the Messiah who would lead them over their enemies. And there had been this longing. Again, just to remind us that after the fall of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, they went into exile. They came back 70 years later, and they continued to come back. But from that time, referred to as the apocalyptic age, they had never really gone. They looked back the Son of David, King David, who had given them this reign over all their enemies. And there was this longing for someone else to come like David, who would push out the Romans. And now they had spent 3 years with Jesus. They had seen his miracles. They had eaten bread, created out of, multiplied. They had seen him raise the people from the dead. And they were expecting to reign with him. They were not expecting him to die. They were expecting to reign. So what did they mean when they said, what will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign of your coming? So now Jesus begins to answer. As I've mentioned, he's already walked into Jerusalem and all these things. He begins to answer the question. And I would like us now to take us, by the way, just to take it a little further, you remember that even when he died, when the religious leaders were able to turn the people against him, and they killed him, put him on the cross, then they mocked him. They mocked him, saying, King of the Jews, King of the Jews. And the thief had insight. I don't know, the thief was one of the crowd who were there in those days, because the thief, the one, not the bad thief, is the other one who said, remember me today in your kingdom. Remember me today in your kingdom. So what I'm putting across here is that our understanding of come is different. It's different. His coming into his kingdom was referring to something different. Now let's go to the Daniel passage that it brings it more to light. It's the passage that Daniel had. Daniel, very powerful vision. It's one of the most powerful visions. I think when I read it, I just feel goosebumps all over, because God allowed Daniel to see something so precious that happened. And when did this happen? Let's just read it fast and we shall see. I'll just talk a bit about it. So it talks about how Daniel says, I was verse 13 of chapter 7. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming, the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages would serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom, the one that which will not be destroyed. Now, this was already available in the days Jesus lived. The prophecies of Daniel were clear, they were known, and they were under oppression. The Jews, they were looking forward to this Son of Man. And now, just note a few things about this vision. It says, I saw one like a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. Now, question, and probably some of you have heard me ask this question before. Which direction is he going? Is it coming down to earth, or is it going up to heaven? It says, coming with the clouds of heaven, he came to the Ancient of Days. Now, obviously, what happened here is that God allowed Daniel to get a vantage point near his throne. And as he's looking, maybe beside God or at a side, he sees somebody coming to the Ancient of Days. And what happens? It's such a powerful saying. It's coming with the clouds of heaven, which means usually the clouds of heaven is the picture language of the hosts of heaven, the angels. There's such a powerful scene of Jesus coming with the angels, and he comes before the Ancient of Days. And when he comes, there is a conferment of the kingdom. You know, they brought him near. So he's escorted and brought near. Wow, you know, I don't know that you feel what I'm feeling. They brought him near the Ancient of Days, and he's given the kingdom. The question is, when did this happen? When did this happen? Now, I'll tell you when I think it happened. Here is a picture of a triumphant Christ. And I'll just like to remind you the events of the resurrection morning. You will remember that when Jesus rose from the dead, the first person to see him was Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was in distress because the body had been taken away. The disciples, she had run, called the disciples. Peter and John came running. John ran faster than Peter, looked in, realized the body was gone. The stone had been rolled away. Peter comes in and walks in, and they realize the body is not there. Now, these guys, their minds are spinning. Remember, they were not expecting a dead Christ, so they were even hiding. You know, so going back to our question, they could not have been thinking about the second coming the way we think about it. Their thinking was completely different. So as they leave, Mary remains weeping in the garden, and then Jesus appears, and she first thinks it's the gardener. So she turns, and when she realizes it's Jesus, she wants to hug him, and he says, "Don't touch me yet. I have not gone to the Father." You know. Now remember, he's a high priest. In the book of Hebrews tells us that this high priest went with his own blood to the tabernacle that is in heaven. So the reason it gives Mary not to touch him is that I've not yet gone to my Father and your Father. But later that same day, in the evening of that same day, there are two disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, and he appears alongside them. He walks with them for, this is about 7 miles. Must have been quite, well, I don't know at what point he joined them, but along that journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about 7 miles. And then he sits down with them, and then he disappears. Okay, the disciples realize the Lord is risen. So it is late in the night. They just get up and run back in Jerusalem, another 7 miles. They had quite a bit of walking that day. 7 miles one way, 7 miles the other way. And then when they come to Jerusalem, must have been the dead of the night. They are banging on the door. The disciples are hidden. They are locked up. They are terrified. They walk in, and then Jesus appears among them. And he says, "I'm not a ghost, touch me." So the second time he allows them to touch him. Now, I believe that between the morning when he told Mary Magdalene, do not touch me, and the evening when he said, you can touch me, something happened. And this is when I believe this vision was fulfilled, that Jesus ascends into heaven. Why? To take his blood, to give a report that everything you send me to do, I've finished. Here's the evidence. As Hebrews tells us that this priest took not the blood of bulls and goats, he took his own blood to the heavenly tabernacle. And this is the sin. And as you may have heard me dramatize it sometime, we often quote Psalm 24, lift up your heads, all you gates, the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord mighty, the Lord of hosts. Now, this, I believe, is one of those places where this was fulfilled. Because remember, there were a lot of angels around the resurrection. There were a lot of angels who came to ensure that Jesus rises from the dead. And they now escort him. And they're moving with him to heaven. Why? Because he's going to receive a kingdom. He has paid for everything. He has paid for the sin of Adam, for the sins of the world. He has bought back the earth which was lost. He has redeemed the earth. Now he's coming to his Father. And this is the sin. And as one bunch of angels are coming, they're shouting as they come to the heavenly gates. They shout out, lift up your gates, heads, all you gates, so the King of glory may come in. And the other angels are asking, the gatekeepers, if I may ask, who is this King of glory? These angels who are escorting Jesus saying, the Lord mighty in battle, King of glory. So they come in and that scene is played out and Jesus is brought. He says they brought him, coming with the clouds of heaven, and they brought him before him. He received a kingdom. So this happened at the resurrection, on the resurrection day. And that day is the most significant day probably in all of history. Maybe apart from the creation of man, there are some significant days, but this day is the day that Jesus brought back everything. So I hope you get that rendition or that explanation of what this coming is. Now, I just want to remind us about some of the things that Jesus said. Matthew 24:14, he said, the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, then the end will come. Now, again, what is that end? What is that end? Is it the end of the world? Is it the end of the Judaism system? But he said the gospel shall be preached. And in one of the sessions we covered how 4 or 5 different verses in the New Testament which refer to the gospel being preached at the end to the whole world hearing the gospel. We'll have to let the Bible interpret itself. Okay. So and that's by the time Jerusalem was destroyed, these verses, the scriptures have been written. And there's another reference in Matthew 10:23. I just note it down. I haven't put up on the screen. Where Jesus says, truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. You will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. So the Son of Man comes before they finish going through the cities of Israel. So the date when the Son of Man comes happens before they finish going through the cities of Israel. Okay? So the judgment of Jerusalem, while it talks about the judgment of Jerusalem coming after they preached the whole world, the Son of Man's coming is linked to going through the cities of Jerusalem. So there people have different views. Some talk about this being the judgment of Jerusalem. Of course, the futurists, so those who are dispensationalists, talk about this being the end of the world, which is still a future date. But if we read the scriptures carefully, I think I'm more convinced now that this coming of the Son of Man is referring to what Daniel saw, and that actually is an event that happened in heaven. Okay? We'll talk about the sign of it. What was the sign that had happened? What was the sign that this event had happened? But we'll come to that in a moment. But this coming of the Son of Man is referring, and remember the direction here is not coming to earth, it's going before the throne. It's going before the throne. So just to underscore again, what will be the sign of your coming is not talking about the second coming as we know it. Is referring to the sign of Jesus coming into his kingdom. The sign that he has come is now fulfilled, the prophecy that Daniel talked about. And this happened at the day of the resurrection. Now, I'd like us to look at another passage, a passage that is the parable of the 10 minas. Jesus talks in Luke 19. He compared himself to a nobleman who had gone to a distant country to receive a kingdom. So he said, the nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then to return. He's giving a parable. And now we know that he was talking about himself. A nobleman is the son of God, son of man, went to a distant country. That distant country is heaven. One, to receive a kingdom. We talked about that just now. He went to receive a kingdom for himself and then to return. At the time he said these words, the disciples did not really understand. But he said that after the nobleman received the kingdom, he returned to judge the servants and his enemies who refused to receive him. Now, and in that passage, it says concerning the enemies, that who said, "You not reign over us," it said, "Bring them here and slaughter them in my presence." Now, it appears here that Jesus was talking about events that would take place in his life. And did he go away to receive the kingdom? When he ascended. He ascended to heaven. We've just seen that. When did he come to judge his enemies? AD 70. AD 70, that's when Jesus came in power to judge Jerusalem, to judge the enemies. And remember what he had called them, the blood of all the martyrs from Abel to Zechariah will be brought upon this generation. It happened in AD 70. It happened in AD 70. So take time to digest that. It's taken me a while to really appreciate this, but take time to digest that. So now there's something else here, which is in Matthew 24, verse 30. It says, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. That's how the New American Standard Bible puts it. Now, typically, when I've read these things or when dispensations look at these words, they look at Jesus appearing in the sky at some future date. But we just need to remember that if we follow consistent interpretation, it said that these things would happen in the generation of the disciples. This generation shall not pass away. This is the term he used, that this generation was referring to the not the disciples, but the religious system that was there at that time. And remember, we also say that some of those alive would see him come into his kingdom. Okay, that's if you want to get the reference. So I've mentioned it earlier, Matthew 16, 28, and also Mark 9. So with this in mind, let us also try to understand what this would be. By the way, just to point out, the King James Version talks about heaven. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. One refers to heaven, the other one refers to the sky. And when you look at the original words, which is always a good thing to do, you find that the original word can actually be translated either sky or heaven. It can either be, he shall appear in the sky, both of them would be actually correct, or appear in heaven. But he mentions that he didn't say, therefore, then you shall see the Son of Man appear. Just look at those words carefully. He didn't say, He said, you shall see the sign. You shall see the sign, you shall see the sign. The sign is a similar. Many of you have seen that sign. What does that sign tell you? It's not telling you that this is a school here. No. It is a sign. When you see it, you know there's a school nearby. Okay. So a sign is like a billboard. It's declaring something. That means when you see this, you understand something else. If you're driving and you see the sign of a railway crossing, it's telling you ahead there'll be a railway crossing. Or sometimes a sign of a bridge as you're driving. It's a sign. It's not the bridge. It is telling you that something is ahead. Just like this one here is telling you that the school, is ahead. And so what is it? It said that you'll see the sign of the, say in heaven, that says, or the sky. So basically, the sign of the Son of Man is something that happens on the earth that when you see it, you know that, something else has happened. And remember, we are talking about the sign of his coming, so the sign of your coming. How would they know that the king has actually sat on the throne? Remember, they're not in heaven, but what would happen that they would know absolutely sure that the king has sat in heaven. Now, again, going back to what happened in Jerusalem, in terms of the judgment, I've just been talking about the signs that would end in the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, follow the temple and destruction of Jerusalem, a billboard on the earth, once they saw it, they would know. And it would appear that this Jerusalem thing, the destruction of Jerusalem, which they thought would never be destroyed, was so beautiful. So when you see this, when you see these events, when you see the judgment in Jerusalem and the temple, you would know without a doubt that Jesus is sitting on his throne in heaven. Now, to go back to the first century Jewish people, to understand the significance, maybe in our days, the thing that may make more sense is what happened in Second World War, because most of us in history would have read about the dropping of the atomic bomb. Two atomic bombs were dropped in Japan. One in Hiroshima, the other is in Nagasaki. The US dropped these two atomic bombs in those cities, over the cities. It was on the 6th and the 9th of August, respectively, 1945. And those bombs were not, the earth had not seen anything like them before. First time anything like that had happened on earth. It's estimated that between 120,000 and 226,000 people were killed just in seconds. The bomb blasted and these thousands of people died. And now imagine you're in Japan and there's a war going on, and then you see these two things. What is it telling you? In fact, once those bombs were dropped, the emperor just, surrendered, because how many more bombs are you going to have, to fight? The far superior technology had come, and that was it. After those two wars, it was very clear. Everyone watching knew one thing, that Japan had lost the war. So the bombs were a clear sign to Japanese people that the war was over. The US had won the war. Now, compare this to Jerusalem, destroyed in AD 70. By the way, more people died in Jerusalem than those who died when the two atomic bombs were dropped in Japan. But just to give you a sense of scale, and the population is bigger now, but more people died in the siege of Jerusalem than when the two bombs were dropped. Now, so when Jerusalem fell, it was like, whoa, this incredible. It's the center of our national life, the temple, everything about the temple. That was a sign. It was a sign that, something had happened, something had changed. The end of the age had come. The age, the age which had been running since the days of Moses, that's about 1,500 years before Christ, something like that. This whole had come to an end. It was such a catastrophic thing to the Jews. As we saw last time, their religious system was ended. They could no longer approach God through the temple with animal sacrifices. The high priests were out of place. They were taken into exile. Now God had begun something totally new, because those who understood what the writer of the Hebrews was saying were realizing that God was bringing something totally new. And the kingdom age had come. So it's coming to our closing time. I'll just recap this to say that to understand these scriptures, it's one of the important things to do in Bible interpretation is to go back to the time. Because today we read the scriptures with a different mindset. We are 2,000 years removed from what was going on at the time. And when we look at some of the scriptures, we're looking at what will come. It's like we are passing it in the future. But the people who lived at the time, first of all, as I mentioned, the expectation of what Jesus was about to do was very different. It's not what we think now, because we still expect him to come and, when he said to come, in the sense to establish his kingdom on the earth. It's our prayer, our Lord's prayer every day, thy kingdom come. When will you come to your kingdom? So in that sense, yes. And I'm not saying that there will necessarily not be any other thing happening. Scripture sometimes mirrors things happen and then they happen again in a different way. But it's important for us to appreciate this, that the people who live at the time, they did not expect Jesus to die, no. So when they were asking, when what will be the sign of your coming, they are thinking in the context of Daniel chapter 7, I saw one like a son of man coming in the clouds of heaven. And again, bringing that sense that he was given power and authority and his kingdom would reign over all people. And again, Zephaniah would drive out the war horses. That is what they had in mind. They're not asking about, what we now understand as a coming in that sense. And when we understand it that way, then we realize that, okay, there is possible another understanding of this passage. We're going to continue with this. We're not done with it yet. There's still more to explain, the signs, the different signs that of the end of the age. The stars, we'll look at the issue of the stars and the sun and the moon. The key thing I want to emphasize, let the Bible interpret itself. The Bible is one whole. So when you see one word being used here, check where else was it being used and what did it mean when it was being used. And that will be our continuation next time as we look at the sign of your coming, the signs of judgment, because it talks about the tribulation of those days, which, by the way, now you do realize, as we talked about recently, the tribulation of Jerusalem, the Holocaust in AD 70. It was short, it was intense. The Holocaust of 1945 was longer. So if you're to use it in terms of time, many more people died in terms of time. Within the number of dead per day, for example, during the siege in Jerusalem, and the intensity of what happened there. So the sun, the moon, the stars, the powers of the heavens. What is that saying? What is that saying? We'll look at other passages that, and if probably in your preparation for next, you can look at, just study those words. What do stars mean? What do the moon mean? What does the sun mean? And so on. Amen. So powerful vision of the coming of the Son of Man. This event has happened. Remember, he had promised he'll build his church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And again, remember that when he rose from the dead, a few days later, within 40 days, he had the ascension. But he told them, all authority has been, heaven and earth has been given to me. When did that happen? I believe it happened on the resurrection day. When he rose from the dead, he was escorted into heaven. He was given authority. So he could tell the disciples for the ascension, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore go. Now, we will keep going here, and then we shall begin at some point. We have to keep going into next year because it's important for us to have this understanding of what God expects us to do because of what he has already done and what he has already received as a kingdom. I'll stop here and open up the meeting for questions. Thank you for your attention.